the road to Emmaus. You've been hearing it all your lives. Jesus has appeared incognito to a couple of disciples who are walking away from Jerusalem despondent. But once they get to Emmaus and suddenly he appears to them, their eyes open, they race back to Jerusalem, eager to tell the other disciples the news. And they must know the disciples pretty well because they know where they're hiding out. And we've been told that Jesus kept their eyes closed so that they wouldn't recognize him. So these people know Jesus. They may have been hanging out with him for years. But when they rush back to Jerusalem and they find the place where the disciples are hiding out, before they can say anything, the disciples say, "Hey, Simon has seen Jesus resurrected." Now that Simon is Simon Peter, the one that we know as Peter. Jesus had said to Simon, "I'm going to build this church on your foundation. You have been my right-hand man. I trust you. I'm going to build the church on you. So I'm going to give you a new name, Peter." Peter means rock. And that's not so obvious in English, but in French, Peter is Pierre, and Pierre means rock or boulder in French. So Peter is the foundation of the church, and he has seen Jesus resurrected. And you can bet this is a story that Peter wanted to tell, since he was the one who was in the courtyard who denied Jesus 3 times. Peter's going to want to go to town on the story of how he saw the resurrected Jesus. But Luke decides not to tell us that story. It's very odd. Peter's the big deal among the disciples. But instead, Luke doesn't tell us that story. Instead, he tells us the story of these 2 disciples who we've never heard of before. They haven't been mentioned in the rest of Luke's gospel. He decides to tell their story about how they met the resurrected Jesus. So why? Well, what do we know about these people? Not much. One of them is named Cleopas, and the other one goes unnamed. And in fine biblical tradition, if someone goes unnamed, it probably means they're a woman. At the end of the story, they're going to go into the same house and offer Jesus a meal, so it's entirely possible this is a husband and wife who are walking away from Jerusalem. But we don't know anything about them. What we do know is that they're depressed. They're walking away from Jerusalem. They've heard the rumors that Jesus is resurrected, but that's not enough to keep them in Jerusalem. They say that they have been waiting for a Messiah who is going to end the rule of the Romans, to free Israel. And that hasn't happened, obviously. Jesus ended up on a cross. He was tortured after he was arrested, and then he was beaten, and then sent to the cross, hung up, and left for dead. And even the news that he's been resurrected hasn't been enough to keep these 2 people in Jerusalem. They decide to leave. This has not worked out the way they'd hoped, so they take off. Okay. But of course, the twist in this story is that they're not alone. They meet a stranger on the road who they start talking to, and they explain the whole story of what's going on. And they don't know that it's Jesus because he's closed their eyes to that fact. So they're walking along the road, despondent, despairing, and Jesus says, no. You've misunderstood this. And he spends the rest of the walk telling them about how all of Hebrew Scripture, which they consider to be history, has been leading to this moment of Jesus' resurrection, which is the world's greatest plot twist, that he was able to come back alive. He's telling them that, and it takes a long time to get to Emmaus, right? We're told that it's 7 miles away, so think about how long it would take you to walk 7 miles. 2 to 3 hours for sure, without hiking boots on, just sandals, right? So it's a long walk. So they're walking, and Jesus has the time to go through Scripture and say, this predicted this would happen, this predicted this would happen, and go through all the various prophecies in the Psalms. And some of the Psalms and prophecies seem to predict that the Messiah is going to be a warrior, someone who is going to raise an army and be able to kick out whoever is opposing or invading the Israelis. And that hasn't happened. Instead, he would have pointed out stories in the book of Isaiah about the suffering servant, the one who's going to be beaten and yet be the Messiah and rescue Israel and all the nations. So he spends 3 hours telling this tale. He's saying that what's happened in the present with the resurrection has changed the past. It has changed the way they should read their past. Right? The Hebrew Scriptures aren't the same once Jesus is resurrected, because all the stuff which seemed obscure and impossible has come true. So the present has changed the past. Have you ever had an experience like that, where something happens in the present that makes you reconsider your past? Maybe it was that time you were in the doctor's office and you got a diagnosis and you went, oh, all those aches and pains from before, which seemed like nothing, they've been leading to this day in the doctor's office. I have been suffering from this for a while, but I didn't notice it. I didn't realize it. The present changes the way you see the past. Or maybe it's the day someone popped the question. Maybe it's that day that they said, will you marry me? Or you asked them if they'd marry you. And suddenly, that first date, which seemed like such a disaster, became the best first date you ever had. That was the first date that was going to lead you to the one that you loved, the person that you were going to move in with, the person you were going to spend the rest of your life with. The present changed the past. Now, Luke gets this idea across in a really, really clever but subtle way. And the way he does it is that he decides to retell a story so that it seems different the second time. And you all know the story. We teach it in Sunday school all the time. It's one of the few stories in the whole Christian canon that most non-Christians know. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. You remember the story, right? Two people are walking along a road, and they find a man who's been beaten up and left for dead. And they go, I don't want anything to do with that man. So they cross the road, and they keep on going. And they walk away from him. And eventually, somebody, the Good Samaritan, finds that poor, broken, beaten up, left for dead man and takes him to a house where, that's not where he lives, but he takes him to a house, to an inn, and he gets him fed, and he offers to pay the bill no matter how much it costs for this man to stay there until he can be completely restored back to health. Right? Two people leave a person left for dead, abandon him. That person gets put into a house where he gets better. Today's story, two people walking with a man who's been left for dead, who they left behind. They end up in a house where that person who had been left for dead gets a meal and is offered to stay the night because it's not safe out there on the road. It's the same story told twice. But the twist in it, of course, is that this time, the man who was beaten and left for dead gets a chance to talk to the two people who abandoned him. It's almost as though the Road to Emmaus story is the sequel to the Good Samaritan story. What would Jesus do, or rather, what would the beaten man do if he had a chance to talk to the people who crossed the road and left him behind? Jesus was beaten, left for dead, and these two walked away from Jerusalem. They said, that's it. He wasn't the Messiah I was looking for. I'm leaving. And they walk away depressed and despondent. And Jesus, in this case, is able to talk to them. And listen to what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, how could you abandon that man back in Jerusalem? You've heard that maybe he's resurrected and you're still walking away? He doesn't say that. And he doesn't say, I'm back. Let's go get some weapons. Let's go be guerrilla warriors against the Romans. Doesn't say that either. Instead, he says, look at our past and see how it's all been leading to this wonderful event of the resurrection. Look at all these things which came together and led to this wonderful resurrection, which, of course, there's no point in being resurrected if nothing good's going to come out of it. So he's pointing towards a hopeful future. Jesus teaches radical optimism to these two people who are so depressed walking away from Jerusalem. The beaten, broken man who was abandoned doesn't wallow in bitterness, but in hope. And he offers hope and insight to these two people who have lost it. Have you ever been around someone who's a radically optimistic person? Someone who thinks no matter what bad thing's happening, some good can come out of it? They're often really magnetic personalities. Barack Obama, in his first campaign, yes, we can, radical optimist. Convinced millions and millions of people to vote who didn't usually vote, had all sorts of people crossing party lines. He inspired a whole country. That's radical optimism. Lots of business leaders, successful ones, are radical optimists. They see opportunities where other people don't. Walt Disney, for instance, who obviously got famous by creating Mickey Mouse and all those wonderful early animations and now created a whole empire, his first animation company went bust. Didn't work. He went bankrupt with the first animation company, but he didn't give up. Instead, he went on to make Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, his big breakout hit. It cost 3 times as much as budgeted. It almost didn't get made, but it did get made. And he was certain that it was going to work because he was a radical optimist. And this is what he says about optimism. I always like to look on the optimistic side of life, but I'm realistic enough to know that life is a complex matter. Amen, brother. It certainly is. It's very, very complicated. And you can't be a mindless optimist, right? No Pollyanna stuff. But radical optimists are the ones who look at the full field of possibility and go, there's still a chance that things can work. We may have to change things, but there's still a chance that things can work. In business, it turns out that radical or optimists tend to make more money than pessimistic people. They get promoted more, and they stress about finance much less. In one study, they found that salespeople who were optimistic made 56% more sales than non-optimistic people. And that led one major insurance company in the United States to start actually screening when they were hiring for optimists. And they wouldn't hire people for sales unless they were optimists. It saved them millions and millions of dollars. Jesus teaches optimism. Jesus is the ultimate, everything has gone wrong story, and then it turns around. Why would a man who was expected to be a military leader, who gets himself hung up on a cross, be the one who becomes the foundation of a religion which now has 2 billion followers? If that isn't a plot twist, what is? So Jesus teaches this kind of optimism, but I'm not entirely sure the church has taken this to heart. We often talk about how bad things are going. We're shrinking. No one believes in us anymore. Lots of people look at us and go, come on. I think Jesus would say, no, it's just that you guys are on the wrong track. If Jesus was walking down the road with the church, Jesus would probably say, listen, you guys should be coming up with the visions of what could be, not moaning about what was. What could be? Yesterday was Earth Day. Why is it that the church hasn't played a bigger role in the environmental movement? Why aren't we the ones coming up with the visions of what Toronto could look like if it was green and sustainable 30 and 50 years from now? Why do we leave that to government departments who are not known for being visionaries in many things? We leave it to artists and we leave it to government departments, but the church has just sort of been sitting on its hands. I think that the church should have entire departments devoted to what would Toronto and the country look like if we had racial and sexual and gender equality. What would it look like if we had a truly green, sustainable country? We should pour money into that. And I'm optimistic enough to think we still could. We just have to want to. After 3 hours, Jesus and the 2 people he's been walking with get to Emmaus. And Jesus looks like he's going to keep going. And they say, no, wait, you should stay. Come into our house. It's getting dark. It's not going to be safe. We're all hungry. So they come in, they sit down, and they have a meal. And this is where things get weird, right? Jesus blesses the bread, breaks it, and then suddenly, for the first time in this 3-hour journey, they can see Jesus for who he really is. Like, holy cow, that's Jesus. And then, poof, he disappears. That's weird. I admit that that's weird. But all the resurrection stories have something weird in them. It's not just this one. Okay, he disappears. What's that about? But he doesn't disappear. When Jesus was last with them for the Last Supper, the day that he was arrested, right? He had said, anytime people who get together in my name, eat bread and drink wine in my name, I will be with you. That's the whole message of the Last Supper. That's why we continue to do the Eucharist. And so here, he's doing exactly that. He's breaking bread and drinking wine with them, and at that moment, they can see him, and then he disappears into them. He didn't disappear completely. He just becomes part of them. And you can tell because they change. They suddenly go, oh my goodness, that was Jesus. And then they say, don't you remember our hearts were burning as he told us the story about how to reinterpret Scripture? So their present has just changed their past, the past of that walk. Suddenly that walk looks totally different because they realized they were walking with Jesus the whole time. And they are just set on fire. And they do something which makes no sense at all, but they do it anyway. They decide to go back to Jerusalem. It's dark now. It's not safe. That poor man in the Good Samaritan story is walking along a road, got beaten up in broad daylight. Bandits live on those roads. They don't care. They take the risk to go all the way back to Jerusalem, another 3-hour walk, all the way back to Jerusalem, knowing the danger. It doesn't matter. They head all the way back to Jerusalem, where they find the disciples. They must know where they're staying. They find them because they're close to them, and they come with their news. And the first thing the disciples say is, hey, Simon Peter saw Jesus. And they go, that's nice, but let me tell you my story. And Luke has decided that their story, the story of these two depressed people walking away from Jerusalem, was more important than Simon Peter's story because their story is our story. We're all walking down the road away from Jerusalem. We're all walking away thinking that life has no hope, that life's difficult, that we're not going to be able to figure things out. That's always our problem. And Luke is saying, Jesus is always with you, even if you can't see him. Jesus is always on the road with you. God is always there with you through life's trials and tribulations. You may not be able to see him. You may not be able to recognize Jesus with you, but Jesus is always there. Hope is always present. That promise of radical optimism is always with you. The present can change the past, and when you think that the past has potential in it, then you can see a new future. Jesus is with us all the time, when we can see Jesus and when we can't. And that is a source of comfort and hope. It makes life possible. What we've got now is not all that is possible. Now plus Jesus, now plus God equals a more hopeful future. It's brought us this far, and it can bring us much further. And we can be a blessing to the rest of society. We don't need to be in charge. We're asked to be the yeast for the bread, not the whole loaf. All we have to do is be a loving inspiration because we believe it. Then we can help change the world. We can join hands with people who also want a better world, whether they're Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or Jewish or atheist or agnostic. It doesn't matter. If we can embrace love, we can all run back towards a better future with our hearts burning. Amen.